You want to hear the story about the real witch?
Yeah, but I like it.
There was.
Scary and spooky. I don't like it.
Well, once upon a time, there was a king named Saul, and he was the king of the Israelites. And King Saul had forgotten to keep the commandments. He didn't listen to the prophet. He didn't do what the prophet said, but he still wanted the prophet to help him. But the prophet was so frustrated at him. He said, "Okay, Saul, I'm done with you. I can't help you anymore because you refuse to do what God tells you to do. When I tell you to do things, you don't do them." Does somebody say that at your house sometimes?
Yeah.
Oh, good. So anyway, so Saul left the prophet Samuel. Samuel left the King Saul, and he said, "Okay, I'm never going to come back again and see him." And it wasn't too long after that Samuel the prophet died. Well, then Saul had to face this huge army of Philistines. They were big, strong warriors. Have you ever heard of Goliath?
Yeah.
Goliath, the big tall dude?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a Philistine. Anyway, so Saul was terrified. And he said, "Oh, I need Samuel the prophet to tell me what to do." But Samuel was dead. And so he said, "Well, if I could find a witch, maybe she could call him forth from the dead. Samuel, Samuel, come help me." But one of the things that Samuel had told Saul was to not have witches and people who would try to tell your fortune and tell the future. He said, no, they don't have the power to do that. Only the devil helps them do that. If you want to know what's going to happen, then you need to ask the Lord. He knows what's going to happen, and he will tell you the right thing. And so, so all the witches were put to death, except for this one who lived in a town called Endor. And Saul found her, and he went to her and he said, "I need a witch." And she said, "Are you going to kill me?" And he disguised himself, which is pretty hard to do when you're a foot taller than anybody else in your whole kingdom. But he said, "Oh no, I'm not Saul. No, I'm not going to kill you." But he said, "I need you to help me." And so she said, "Well, what do you want?" He said, "Get Samuel a prophet for me, would you?" So it was dark, and she did her incantations, and she said, "Oh, I see him." And Saul said, "What does he look like?" "Oh, he has a mantle on." "Oh yeah, that's him. That's him." Because prophets wore mantles, I guess. They all seem to. "Okay, well, so what do you want me to ask him?" "Well, tell him I got to have help. I'm going into this battle, and I need some help." And so she asks this apparition that she says is really Samuel the prophet. Do you think it's really Samuel the prophet? No. Joseph Smith said they're not going to make Samuel the prophet come out of heaven to talk to this guy who would never listen to him when he was alive. So it wasn't really Samuel, and Saul didn't even see anything or hear anything because he had to ask her what she saw and what he said, and so we don't know if she really saw something or nothing, but it wasn't the prophet because he would work through priesthood channels, and they don't do that sort of thing. So Saul said, "Oh, ask him about this battle. What should I do about this battle?" And the witch said, "Oh, you're all going to die, and they're going to beat the stew out of you, and you and your sons are going to be killed. Oh, now are you going to kill me?" And he said, "No, I'm not going to kill you." But he was really sad. And she said, "Here, you better have something to eat," because he had been fasting all day. That's something when you fast to go see the witch, huh? He should have fasted when he went to see Samuel instead. But no, he was so weak he couldn't even get up. So she gave him some food to eat and sent him on his way. And the next day they had a battle against the Philistines. And guess what happened?
What? He died.
He died. He was killed, and his sons were killed. His son Jonathan, who was so wonderful. He was so faithful and good, but he got killed, and it wasn't his fault. It was because his dad had made some bad choices, and sometimes we get to suffer the consequences of other people's bad choices, huh? Like if they get drunk and then they drive their car and crash into us. That kind of thing, yeah. So anyway, so Saul and his sons were killed, and it was a sad day for Israel, and the Philistines beat him up and took him captive. So fortunately, Samuel had already anointed another king. Do you know what his name was?
No.
He was a boy. He wasn't even a man.
David.
His name was David. You're right. To be the next king. So everybody knew who the next king was going to be. And David could be a good king if he chose. We'll have to see later on if he chooses to be a good king or not. Because sometimes kings start out good and then they get bad. Kind of like grandmas.